have never believed in ghosts or other supernatural things. Ghosts, spirits, and hauntings all seemed like things that people would make up around a campfire or in their wildest dreams. But then I had 3 very real and terrifying events that broke my suspension of doubt. I'm writing them down now because I think telling these stories will help me feel better. Or maybe it was just to try to figure out what I saw. It began in the summer after I bought my first house. Finally having my own place. A small 2-story house on the edge of a quiet area made me very happy. The only bad thing? It had an empty basement that made people feel uneasy. I got a chill every time I walked by the downstairs door. One night, after moving boxes, I chose to store some old things in the basement. I opened the door and flicked on the light, but the bulb buzzed and flashed before going out completely, sending the room below into darkness. I swore under my breath and grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to navigate the steep, creaky steps. The basement was cold. Colder than the rest of the house, almost strangely so. I could see my breath freezing up in front of me, which didn't make sense. It was the middle of summer. As I shoved some boxes into the corner, I heard a whisper. A whisper. "Help me." I froze. The voice was soft, barely heard, but it came from the far end of the room. I shone my phone's light in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Just old, dusty shelves. I told myself it was the house settling or maybe a trick of my mind and quickly made my way back up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. That night, I barely slept, the whisper repeating over and over in my mind. A few days later, I asked a friend over to help fix the light in the basement. As we worked, he asked, "Did someone die in this house?" I looked at him. "Not that I know of." "Why?" He pointed toward the far wall, where I'd heard the voice days earlier. There, scratched into the cement wall, was a single word. "Help." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I didn't see that before," I stuttered. We finished fixing the light and left the basement, but the feeling of being watched remained every time I passed that door. Things escalated after that. At night, I would hear footsteps dragging slowly across the floor above me, even though I knew no one was there. Objects would move on their own. A book that I'd left on the coffee table would end up across the room. And every time I went near the basement, the voice would return. I moved out after 6 months, leaving the house to someone else. To this day, I wonder who the whisper belonged to and what had happened in that basement long before I lived there. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go on a late-night drive down a supposedly spooky road just outside of town. Locals called it Dead Man's Alley, and there were stories of car crashes, ghosts, and even phantom hitchhikers. We didn't believe any of it, of course. We thought it would be fun to scare ourselves. The road was narrow, with thick trees running either side and barely any lighting. As we drove deeper into the woods, a heavy fog fell over the road. The headlights of my car barely cut through the mist, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. "That's creepy," my friend Mike said from the passenger seat, pointing ahead. I squinted, trying to make out what he was talking about. Up ahead, in the middle of the road, was a figure. A woman, dressed in white, standing totally still. My heart raced as I slowed the car. "Is she hurt?" I whispered. "Maybe she needs help," Sarah, who was sitting in the back, offered. I didn't want to stop, but something about the way she stood there, motionless, made it hard to drive on. I pulled over to the side of the road and Mike rolled down his window. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out. The woman didn't reply. She didn't move. I felt a cold dread settle over me. Something wasn't right. "I don't like this," I mumbled. "Let's just go." As I started to pull away, the woman's head jerked up. Her face, there was something wrong with her face. Her eyes were completely black and it was pale, almost transparent, and her eyes were completely black. Before any of us could respond, she disappeared. Just like that, It disappeared into the fog. The car was quiet as I sped down the road. Everyone was too shocked to speak. After a few minutes, Sarah broke the silence. Was that real? We didn't know what to say. All I knew was that whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. We never talked about that night again, but I stopped driving down Dead Man's Alley. The stories were true. Something haunts that road. My final experience with the paranormal was the one that shook me the most. It was my freshman year in college, and I had just moved into an old apartment building on campus. The building had a reputation for being cursed, but like always, I didn't take it seriously. My friend and I lived on the third floor, at the very end of a long hallway. The building had a strange plan, with dark, narrow halls and creaky wooden floors that groaned with every step. Our room was fine, though tiny, and I quickly forgot about the ghost stories that circled the hall. But then things started happening. It began with footsteps in the hallway late at night. At first I thought it was other students coming back to their rooms, but when I checked, the hall was always empty. Then my roommate stated that she had seen a shadow standing outside our door. She shrugged it off, saying it was probably a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. One night, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was my roommate, but when I looked over, she was sound asleep, her back turned to me. The breathing continued, loud and strained, coming from the end of the room. I froze in bed, my heart beating in my chest. Slowly, I turned my head toward the source of the sound. Standing at the foot of my bed was a figure, a dark shade, tall and looming. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was watching me. I wanted to scream, but fear froze me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, breathing deeply, as if waiting for something. After what felt like hours, the shape finally faded away, disappearing into the darkness of the room. I lay there, too frightened to move until the morning light seeped through the window. My roommate woke up and noticed how pale I was. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice shaking. She had seen the same shadow standing at the foot of her bed just a few nights before. We moved out of that room as soon as we could, moving to a newer building on campus. But I'll never forget the feeling of that shadow watching me. And since then, I've never felt truly safe in the dark. I've learned that the paranormal is not something to be taken easily. I used to think ghosts were a myth, stories told to entertain or scare. But after having these 3 meetings personally, I'm sure there's something out there, something beyond what we can understand, and sometimes it's watching us.